Most people believe they became who they are through choice. I don't think that's entirely true anymore. I think a large part or a large percentage of human behaviour is inherited long before it's ever consciously examined. And that realisation is uncomfortable. Because once you start observing yourself honestly, you begin noticing how much of you might not actually be you. The way you react, the way you speak, what you fear, what you suppress, what you chase, what you avoid. What you think success looks like, and equally what you think failure means. Excuse me. A lot of it was installed early, before you had any awareness, before you had perspective, before you had enough life experience to question any of it. Society starts training people from the moment they arrive here. Fact. And don't get me wrong, not always maliciously, and certainly not always intentionally, but continuously. Yeah, continuously. School trains behaviour. Social groups train conformity. Families train emotional patterns. And the internet, well, that trains attention. Modern culture trains nervous systems into overstimulation. And eventually, people stop asking themselves, why am I like this? They just assume, this is who I am. But they're not the same thing. And I think one of the strangest parts of becoming more self-aware is realising how much of your personality may have originally been adaptation, right? Not authenticity, adaptation. Some people become quiet because speaking created danger. Some became hyper-independent because support was unreliable. Some became performers because validation became, well, survival. And some became aggressive because vulnerability was punished. Some became people pleasers because peace felt safer than honesty. We all know them. And over enough years, the adaptation becomes identity. That's the part most people never stop to examine. because self-observation is difficult. We're not talking surface level reflection here, not motivational quote reflection. Honest work, deep work, real observation. The kind where you sit quietly and ask yourself, where did this behaviour actually come from? See, that level of honesty changes people. Because eventually you realise many emotional reactions were conditioned into you long before you were capable of choosing them consciously. Right? Makes sense? Even rebellion itself can be conditioned. That's another uncomfortable truth. A lot of people believe they escaped social programming simply because they rejected mainstream structures. But reaction can still be reactive conditioning. Some people are not building identities, they're building oppositions. Yeah? And there's a difference. There's a real difference. Real awareness is deeper than rebellion, because awareness asks, am I choosing this consciously? Not, am I resisting something emotionally? And that distinction matters massively. Because emotionally reactive people often believe they are thinking independently while still being controlled by the very thing they oppose. And modern society thrives on that very loop. Outrage, reaction, identity attachment, group conformity. Oh, I've got another one. Algorithmic emotional manipulation. People are rewarded for reacting instantly now. Very few are rewarded for observing carefully. And over time, human beings start losing the ability to sit with their own thoughts without external influence entering the room. Silence becomes uncomfortable. Stillness becomes uncomfortable. Introspection becomes uncomfortable. Because once the noise disappears, people finally hear themselves clearly. And not everybody likes what they find there. That's why self-awareness often becomes lonely before it becomes peaceful. Because awareness dismantles illusions. It dismantles inherited identities, inherited fears, inherited emotional patterns, inherited social performances. And for a while, you genuinely don't know who you are anymore. That's the strange middle ground nobody talks about. The space between who you were conditioned to become and who you are, who you actually are underneath all of it. That transition can feel disorientating at best. You become quieter, more reflective. You stop reacting so quickly. You stop needing constant agreement. You stop performing certainty all the time. You start observing people differently too. You notice behavioural loops everywhere. You notice how fear shapes personalities, how insecurity shapes aggression, and how loneliness shapes performance, how unresolved pain shapes control, and eventually you stop viewing human beings only through mortality. You start viewing them through conditioning, environment, nervous systems, survival patterns, and awareness levels. That doesn't excuse behaviour, but it explains a lot of it. And I think that's one of the biggest shifts awareness creates. You stop seeing humans as simply good or bad. You start seeing how deeply programmed most people actually are, including yourself, especially yourself. That's why this journey becomes internal before external. Because the hardest conditioning to confront is your own. And maybe that's the real beginning of awareness. You know, it's not becoming somebody new, but slowly separating yourself from everything you became unconsciously.